What if I told you your marriage doesn't need another goal? Your kids do not need another strategy. Your home does not need another big plan. What you need is one principle, one practice, and one movement. That is what we're going to be talking about today. You guys, welcome to the Kingdom Family Movement podcast, where our mission is simple and it is to restore God's design for our marriage, the family, and the home, and one principle, one practice, and one movement at a time. You see, today I want to introduce something new, brand new, actually, something simple. It's something sustainable, and it's something powerful enough that I think it can truly reshape the spiritual atmosphere inside of ourselves personally, but even equally and more importantly, maybe our entire homes inside the four walls. It's why I created, and it's called the KFM 111. Again, very simple. It is one principle, one practice, and one movement, right? Because most homes, if we're being honest, right, we don't lack information. We live in the world of information. What we lack, however, is alignment. We lack maybe follow through. And that's not a dig, right? There should be no shame or condemnation in that. But I do believe those are some basic things that we lack. See, we lack simple rhythms that truly anchor our heart and shape our home. So before we jump in, let me just say this. If you're tuning in for the first time or hearing of the KFM podcast, Kingdom Family Movement, just know we appreciate you being here. We're super excited that you found us even. The truth is, because there's so much out there. And so do me a favor. If you've been tuning in or you're tuning in for the first time after today, if you think, you know what, I enjoyed this, hey, leave a review. Add us to the follow side of things, right? When you subscribe to this particular podcast, it's just how the algorithm works. It helps us grow because as people are interested, it tells the system, hey, let's push this out to more people. So that's just the nuts and bolts of it. It's just part of it. I didn't choose it. However, I do believe that what the Kingdom Family Movement podcast has to offer is something foundationally important for today's families, particularly inside the four walls, because we've moved away from it. So if you like what you hear, hey, leave us a comment, a review, follow us, share it with a friend. I'd appreciate it because it's how we grow. So let's just break this down really quick because I think it is so vitally important. And you know what? It is interesting because we live in the world of formulas, outcomes, algorithms, information, all of this stuff. So my goal and heart behind this wasn't to add one more thing that's complicated, confusing, or I think maybe a good way to look at it is unsustainable. You ever feel like things are unsustainable? I know I do, right? We live in a world that we push so hard because we think it's the best way to do it. And then we realize, gosh, I can't maintain this. It's too hard. So how do we draw back a little bit, just settle, be a little bit more restful, find true peace in our everyday lives or the quote unquote rhythms of life? And so that's why I created the KFM 111. And so one principle, right? One principle that we can live by, particularly, I would even say one principle truth. So for example, unity in the home begins with surrender in our heart. See, that's the principle truth. I believe that in order for there to be unity, I have to first surrender myself. I have to be able to relinquish control. I have to be and rid myself of my own selfishness and pride, right? And do all of those things. That's the principle truth before God can really build anything around us, right? He restores what's in us first. We often want God to fix atmospheres and habits and relationships. But the truth is, revival, if you want to use that word, I believe more than we realize begins internally with surrender, with honesty, with transparency, with authenticity, right? With a willingness to let God clean the inside before shaping the outside. A very tough one, right? That's why this is a principle truth to live by. And it's simple, right? Like I said, it is the idea of unity in our home begins with surrender in our hearts. So that's the idea of kind of the one principle truth to live by. And the thing I like about this is we here at KFM focus on marriage, family, and home, but because this is, I think, principally driven, you can apply this to so many areas of your life. It's what I love about it. So If you're thinking, I'm not married or I don't have kids or I'm not in that situation yet, hey, these still apply. That's what's beautiful about it, especially when it comes to principles, because principles never change. It's why we love them or we struggle with them quite often. So, again, the principle is simple. It begins with us internally in our heart before we see unity outward everywhere else, surrender, honesty, all of that. You see, scripture even tells us that we're to have a certain posture in ourselves, right? We're to, as the psalmist said, or David, right? Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me. And let me just kind of break that down. What does that mean? It means that, first of all, create a clean heart in me. That would imply that my heart is likely not clean. There's areas of my heart, and not out of shame or condemnation, just out of a willingness to admit I struggle. I have places that God probably wants to purify in me. And so while I'm fighting to purify something outwardly or in my own home, in my marriage, and my kids and my family, it's probably likely going to best start with me. So acknowledge that there's places in your heart that need to be purified. And then it says, renew a right spirit, renew a right spirit, right? Have you ever not had the right spirit about something? And I'll keep this more layman's term or basic, right? Have you ever just not had a good attitude about the process for something, or just inside you just feel like, ugh, that's dumb, or I don't want to do that, or this is a waste of time, right? And this is Psalms 51 is telling us, and it's almost this prayer. It's saying, God, please, would you begin with me? Would you start with me? Show me in my own heart and make it clean and help renew the right spirit within me. That is so important, right? This is the prayer that we should be praying for the breakthrough we want, right? It's the heart work before the housework, if you want to put it that way. So again, the KFM 111, it's the one principle truth. And then there's the one practice, right? It's the thing we implement. It's the taking that principle truth and then putting it into quote unquote practice, right? So it could be something very simple, right? If I know that the principal truth is it's going to likely start with me in my own heart. If I want unity in the home, I have to surrender my own heart to the process. Then the practice could be something simple like asking your spouse or one of your kids if you have kids, right? I'm taking myself, I'm going to surrender my selfish needs and pride. Not that we don't have needs, but I'm just going to start by simply practicing asking the question, what is one way I can support you today or this week? That's it. It doesn't got to be complicated, right? And I think that's the beauty of this idea, this brand new thing known as the KFM 111, is because the one principle truth, the one practice, and the one movement, which we'll get to, are just simple things that really are in front of us every day that I think we've gotten out of rhythm of practicing. And with practice comes habit forming and building. And that's why the practice is so important. It's not about what it is always that you're practicing or how effective it's going to be all the time, more than it's about the willingness to just practice it. And in this case, asking your spouse or one of your kids, maybe it's a coworker even, hey, what's one way I can support you this week? That's a good practice. That's a good question. And again, it's simple, right? It's one sincere question. And then in that practice, right, include listening, include not correcting, not defending, not justifying, all of the things that I've done so unbelievably natural, right? Because in my humanness, in my selfishness, maybe that's what happens. But just be present, okay? Because presence builds trust, it builds unity, and unity is what begins to establish an atmosphere of peace in the home. See, the simple practice opens the door for the unity, for the connection, right? And connection is kind of the soil where healthy homes begin to cultivate and grow. So, one principle truth, one practice to implement. And then there's the one movement, right? This last piece could be the harder part because once I understand, let's say I have knowledge of, I have some understanding now of that principle truth, I'm beginning to practice it. Now I need to really take action on it, right? And practice and movement are kind of one and the same, but movement is going beyond what I understand and what I know, and then applying the wisdom that causes me to take action on the very principal truth. that I am practicing, right? So it's speaking blessing maybe into your home or over your spouse. Something as small as just a acknowledgement of how grateful you are for one another, how grateful you are for your children, how grateful you are for it doesn't even have to be a person necessarily because this could be applicable to just every day, acknowledging even gratitude towards God and the things we have in our lives that are so easy to take for granted. And I am guilty of that, right? I am grateful for you, or I see how hard you're working. Even just before I'm jumped in here and started recording, my daughter went above and beyond and she had trash this week, but she cleaned the ground around the trash cans. There was leaves and debris, and I didn't say anything. She just took it upon herself. And I asked her, I said, why? I said, hey, thanks for doing that. She's like, oh, I know I didn't need to. It was bugging me. And I said, well, hey, I understand it bugs me too sometimes. But I said, what I want you to know is I appreciate you going above and beyond what you needed to do. And I noticed it. So thank you. And that's it. And then I left it at that. And then, like a true father would, I asked, did you get the trash in the garage too? And she kind of, ugh. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, I'll get it. But it's just the simple things sometimes when it comes to, again, principle, practice, and movement. So don't overcomplicate this. Okay. It could just be acknowledging that someone's life in our own homes matters because when we begin to bless ourselves, even, right, we can speak this over ourselves, but when we begin to do it to those in the home, your spouse, your kids, okay, it shifts the atmosphere. It changes things. We may not see it right away, but over time, which is why we practice, and it's that kind of blessing, it breaks just the weightiness, the heaviness, the fatigue, the unrest, the moments that feel unpeaceful, maybe. It starts to break those things. And I think that blessing awakens identity in the individual because they start to have a sense of self-worth. And this is how we move from principle, right? When we move from principle to practice, action, because knowledge isn't transformation, obedience is, or I would add, it's the wisdom that we gained, right, to take action. It's the skill now that we've built over time to be immediately obedient. And small obedience creates lasting change. So why does this matter so much? Why is this so important? Well, I think there's more than one answer to that, but the reason I think the KFM 111 works and is simple is because principles will shape beliefs and practices build habits, good ones. Movement ultimately changes the atmosphere. It changes the marriage. It changes the family. It changes and brings restoration to the home. And we live in a time, and I'm just going to add this in there because I think it's critical to just to acknowledge, not in a way that we should be afraid or concerned, but realistically acknowledge we live in a time where the most basic principles, practices, and actions that we should be taking inside of our four walls, inside of our marriages, inside of our relationship with our kids has become so diluted that it is evident almost everywhere you go. And I believe that one of the most critical things we can do to change what we see outside of the home is by starting to then practice it to, you know, believe the principal truth, practice it, and then take action on it inside of our own homes. Set the example. We can even think about Jesus's ministry, right? He always taught principle. I think it's what frustrated people, right, in the modern or in the time, right? And even today in modern terms, right? It's what frustrates us because principle doesn't lie. Principle can't be changed, right? I can change laws, I can rewrite laws, I can make a law bend even, but a principle never changes. And that can be super frustrating. He just always taught principle, but then he also demonstrated the practice. And then he called people, he called us to move, right? He's like, follow me, go, sin no more, love one another, right? How many times should I forgive somebody? Well, 70 times seven. Man, he's just saying you got to practice this stuff daily. the principal truth is this, but if you don't practice it, it means nothing. And if you don't practice it, there's a good chance you're going to have a hard time moving and being obedient when the what we call maybe difficult times come or the more challenging things that we can't fully see that we got to take faith on. This is how discipleship happens. This is how marriages heal and become more whole. This is how families strengthen. This is how homes experience revival. It's not through massive spiritual moments. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are massive spiritual moments, but they're moments. They don't sustain necessarily the everyday principal truths and practices and actions we're to be taking inside the four walls. That is up to us. This is why it's kingdom family movement, because it's the single most important thing I think God instituted from the very beginning was the family. Okay. But it's through consistent spiritual obedience, right? Which isn't always easy, right? For an example, right? Our marriages, right? As a husband, I have to practice, right? I have to understand the principle truth that pride comes before the fall. So I have to begin to practice surrendering my pride so I can begin to move towards asking my wife what it is she needs, what it is, and how I can speak blessing over her, right? In parenting, maybe, right? And that goes for both men and women, by the way, as far as marriage, right? It goes both ways. But maybe for us as parents, if you have kids, right? Have you ever been overwhelmed, mom? Have you ever been overwhelmed by your children? Okay. The principle is that we're to raise our kids in the way of the Lord. Well, the way of the Lord, if we look at his life, it was perfect. It was flawless. He was only about his father's business. He only moved in the context of what the Spirit told him to do, whatever the Father said, right? He was patient, loving, kind, all the fruits of the Spirit. So the principal truth is raise your kids in the way of the Lord, mothers, fathers. But then the practice would be, can I pause long enough to understand where it is my kids are at and how I can take the principal truth to actually support them, and then understand and practice and then take movement by speaking identity into them, who it is they really are, right? So many different things that we can do when it comes to principal truth, practice, and movement. Okay. These are just kingdom things. These are not small things. But if we don't have rhythms, if we don't have and create the opportunity to get principle truth, actually practice it, and then do it in such a way that it causes us to move, it becomes dredgy. It becomes weighty. It becomes exhausting. We do things in our own strength. That's not what he's calling us to do. And so ultimately, just if I can remind us too, this is just a tool, but I think it's a very effective one because it's rooted in principle. And it's something we all need to practice. And we should desire to want to take movement on it when it comes to our marriages, our families, and homes, for sure. So here's my invitation to you, right? My invitation is this, is hold the principle, grab hold of the principle, do the actual practice. You can use what I gave you in this, or pick your own principle truth, find your own practice that applies to that principle truth, and then begin to move on it. Okay. But do the practice. Take the movement, take action, right? Faith without works is dead. God, and remember, and I've been saying this a lot lately, God does not demand perfection. He just wants surrender from us. He honors obedience. He honors direction. Unity in the home begins with surrender in my heart, in your heart. And revival doesn't wait for you to get everything figured out. It doesn't wait for you to have perfect and complete understanding and knowledge and all of the wisdom, but it does tell us to get those things. And there's layers, okay? It's just that we got to start. And remember that it starts in your heart and then it bleeds into the home in the simple steps. Hey, in the honest conversations and the small acts of obedience, those are the things that make the difference. Those are the things that we can begin to be rooted in principle truth, practice, and movement in. So you can see reignited marriages, realigned families, and homes fully restored. I believe that wholeheartedly. You guys, I appreciate you tuning in. Hey, as always, if you would like to stay or get connected, hey, first and foremost, know every single Monday we put out a KFM 111 newsletter, which always gives you one principle, one practice, and one movement that you can begin to implement in your own lives within inside the four walls, free to your inbox. So, hey, do me a favor. If you're not a part of that, subscribe to the newsletter. It is free. I'll put the link in the show notes below. And if you want to get connected beyond that, hey, I think we have another link that goes to our link tree with other resources and stuff that you can stay connected with. But you guys, I appreciate you tuning in to the Kingdom Family Movement podcast, as always, where we are fighting to restore God's original intent for the marriage, for the family, and for the home. We will see you on the other side. Peace.